cabin smelled of old wood and older memories. Snow pressed against the windows like it wanted in, but the fire in the stone
This
hearth
valley's
kept it
alive
at
with
bay.
wonder.
And
Ezra
danger.
Blackwood sat
Mist
in his
hides
rocking
much.
chair,
Stay close.
hands wrapped
I will.
around a tin cup of coffee, gone lukewarm, watching the flames dance in patterns that reminded him of things he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. Across from him, his grandson Daniel sat forward on the bench, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the old man's weathered face. The boy was 18, dressed in civilian clothes, but his army pack leaned against the wall beside him like a shadow of tomorrow. He was leaving in the morning, heading to basic training, heading to war. The Great War, they called it. Like there'd never been another. Like men hadn't been killing each other since Cain raised a rock over Abel. Daniel cleared his throat. The sound was small in the quiet cabin. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice carried the weight of things unsaid. "I leave tomorrow. And there's something I need to know before I go." Ezra took a slow sip of cold coffee. Didn't answer, the boy would get there. "Everyone in town," Daniel continued, "they all know Grandma was a nun before she married you, but nobody knows how you met her. Nobody knows the real story. And I think I need to hear it before I go." Ezra set the cup down on the small table beside his chair. His hands shook slightly, not from age, though 90 years had left their mark, from the weight of remembering. On the wall behind Daniel hung a wooden cross carved by hand, simple but precise. Beside it, a framed piece of tan leather covered in faded markings. Next to that, a photograph in a gilded frame, a woman with dark hair going silver, and a man with a face like carved granite, both of them smiling in a way that suggested they'd earned the right to happiness. "You asking about your grandmother," Ezra said quietly, "means you're really asking about who I was before I met her." Daniel nodded. Ezra leaned back in the rocker. It creaked under his weight, a familiar sound that had marked 10,000 evenings just like this one. "Then I'll tell you the truth, boy. I was a dead man, walking, breathing, but dead all the same. Dead in every way that mattered. And I stayed dead for 3 years up on that mountain until a woman in a black habit and a bullet in her shoulder told me that sometimes God saves people by making them save someone else first." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Grandma could shoot." A ghost of a smile touched Ezra's lips. "Your grandmother killed 2 men the winter we met, boy. Put bullets in them, clean as any soldier I ever served with. But that's getting ahead of the story." He reached for his coffee, changed his mind, left it sitting. It was winter, 1868. I was 40 years old and figured I had maybe another 10 years before the whiskey or the cold or the loneliness finished what the guilt started. I lived alone up on Wind River Range in Wyoming Territory, 15 miles from the nearest settlement. Didn't talk to anyone except my dog and the wind. That was how I wanted it. He paused, looking into the fire. "That was how I wanted it," he repeated, until I heard a woman screaming. The flames crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. "This'll take some time to tell proper," Ezra said. "You ready to listen?" Daniel settled back against the wall. "I'm ready." "Then I'll start at the beginning. November 18th, 1868. The day the sky turned the color of blood, and I learned that sometimes the worst mistakes you make are the ones you don't make at all." The old man closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were looking at something 50 years gone, but sharp as yesterday. "It started," he said with gunfire. Wind River Range wore winter like a threat. Snow gathered in the high passes. Not the soft powder that made for pretty mornings, but the hard pack that could bury a man in his sleep if he wasn't careful. Ezra Blackwood had been careful for 3 years, careful to check his traps before dawn, careful to keep his fire small and his profile smaller, careful not to think too much about the cabin he'd left behind in Nebraska or the 2 graves he'd never visit again. The morning of November 18th started like any other. 4 in the morning he was awake. No need for a clock when your body had learned the rhythm of survival. He stoked the fire in the stone hearth, not for warmth, but to boil coffee. The cabin was small. 1 room, walls of pine logs he'd cut himself, roof of split cedar that only leaked when the rain came sideways, a table he'd built from memory of the one his wife Sarah had loved, a bed in the corner, and beside it a smaller bed with Daniel carved into the headboard. He didn't sleep in either bed anymore. The floor suited him fine. Shadow, his dog, lifted his head from the corner where he slept. The animal was half wolf, half something mild, so all loyalty. Ezra had found him as a pup 5 winters back, near frozen in a snowdrift, nursed him back with warm milk and venison scraps. Now the dog followed him everywhere, silent as his name. "Morning, boy," Ezra muttered, pouring grounds into the pot. His voice sounded strange in the quiet. He didn't use it much anymore. By 5:30, he was checking his first trap line. 40 traps scattered in a 5-mile radius around the cabin, each one set with the precision of a man who'd learned the craft from Crow Indians back when he still believed the army was fighting for something that mattered. Beaver mostly in the creeks where the ice ran thin. Marten in the pine forest where the snow drifted deep. Fox along the ridges where the wind kept the ground clear. This morning, 3 traps held catches. 2 beaver, 1 marten. Good pelts. Red Dalton would give him coffee and sugar for them, maybe some cornmeal, if he haggled right. Red ran the trading post in South Pass City, 15 miles south. She was one of maybe 3 people in the territory who knew Ezra Blackwood was still alive. He reset the traps with practiced hands. Each one had to sit exactly 3 inches under the water surface. Any higher, the beaver would see it. Any lower, the chain wouldn't pull taut when the animal ran. He'd learned that lesson the hard way back when Sarah was still teaching Daniel his letters, and Ezra still thought the world made sense. The thought of them hit like it always did, quick and sharp, a knife between the ribs. He pushed it down, kept working. By 10, he'd checked all 40 traps and was heading back to the cabin with his 3 catches. Shadow ranged ahead, nose to the ground, tracking nothing in particular, but always tracking. The dog had caught the scent of elk 2 days back, but Ezra didn't need elk. He had venison hanging in the cold shed, enough to last through January. What he needed was to keep moving, keep his hands busy, keep his mind empty. That's when he heard it, gunfire. 5 shots, maybe 6, coming from the direction of Bitter Creek, half a mile northwest. Ezra stopped walking. Shadow stopped beside him, ears forward. The shots echoed off the canyon walls, distorted by distance and wind, but Ezra could still read them. Rifle fire, multiple shooters, not hunting. Hunting was 1 shot, maybe 2. This was something else. He stood there in the snow, listening to silence settle back over the mountains. "Ain't our business," he said to Shadow. The dog looked at him. "Could be miners fighting over claims." Ezra continued, like the animal might argue. "Could be Indians defending their land. Either way, not our fire to put out." Shadow's ears swiveled toward the sound. Back to Ezra. Back to the sound. "I said no." The dog took 3 steps toward Bitter Creek. Stopped. Looked back. Ezra felt something twist in his chest. Something he'd thought was long dead. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years I kept my head down. Minded my business. Stayed out of it. "You understand what happens if we go over there, if I get involved," Shadow whined softly. "We get dead. That's what happens." But even as he said it, Ezra was checking his rifle. The Sharps 50 caliber he'd carried since his army days. He kept it clean out of habit, not expectation. When you lived alone on a mountain, habit was what kept you breathing. He started walking toward Bitter Creek. Shadow fell in beside him, silent as smoke. "This is a mistake," Ezra muttered. "Sarah, if you're watching this, is your fault." The wind carried his words away. Bitter Creek ran through a narrow gulch between 2 ridges of broken granite. The water froze most winters, but this year had been mild enough to keep a channel open down the center. Ezra approached from the high ground, moving through pine cover, with the careful quiet of a man who'd spent years learning not to be seen. At the ridgeline, he dropped to his belly and crawled the last 20 yards to a spot where the trees thinned. Shadow pressed against his side, warm and solid. Below in the gulch, Ezra could see what had drawn the gunfire. A wagon lay on its side, both wheels pointing at the sky. 2 bodies sprawled nearby, both wearing black. Priests, Ezra realized. Or monks. Hard to tell from this distance, but the clothing was unmistakable. Dark robes, now darker with blood. And running, stumbling down the rocky slope toward the creek was a woman. She wore a black habit and white coif, the kind Catholic nuns favored. Her right shoulder was dark with blood. In her left hand, she clutched a bundle wrapped in tanned leather, holding it against her chest like it was worth more than her life. Behind her, 4 riders. They came slow, not hurrying because they didn't need to hurry. The woman was wounded on foot in a canyon with no way out except the way she'd come in. They had time. They had horses. They had numbers. The lead rider wore a long black coat that snapped in the wind. Even at 200 yards, Ezra recognized the way the man sat his horse. Easy, arrogant, like he owned the land and everything on it. Silas Kane. The name hit Ezra like a fist. He hadn't seen Kane in 2 years. Thought the man had gone back east after Red Cloud's war ended. Thought maybe he'd died in a bar fight or a card game gone wrong. Thought maybe there was some justice in the world after all. Thought wrong. Ezra watched as the woman stumbled, caught herself on a boulder, kept moving. Her left leg dragged slightly. Wounded there too, maybe? Or just exhausted? Didn't matter. She wouldn't make it another 100 yards. One of Kane's men raised his rifle, aimed at her back, didn't fire. They wanted her alive. Ezra's hands tightened on his sharps. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat dropped from 70 beats per minute to 60. Old training taking over, the kind that lived in muscle and bone deeper than thought. He could leave, right now. Back away from the ridge, head to his cabin, pretend he'd never seen this. It's what he'd been doing for 3 years. Staying invisible. Staying out of it. Letting the world burn without his help. Below, the woman fell. Really fell this time, going down hard on her knees. The leather bundle tumbled from her grip. She grabbed for it, missed, grabbed again. Got it. Held it close as she tried to stand and couldn't. One of the riders laughed. The sound carried up the slope, clear as broken glass. Ezra thought about Sarah, about Daniel, about the night he'd lain trapped under a burning beam, listening to them scream, unable to move, unable to help, unable to do anything but listen as their voices got quieter and quieter, and then stopped. He thought about 3 years of whiskey and silence, and waking up wishing he hadn't. He thought about the small bed in his cabin with Daniel carved in the wood. Damn it, he whispered. He sighted down the barrel of his sharps. 220 yards. Slight wind from the west, maybe 5 miles per hour. Target was moving but slow. The math was simple. The shot was clean. The decision was hard. Then the woman looked up, and even from this distance, Ezra could see her face. Not the details, but the expression. No fear, just determination. Just a woman who'd been running and was done running and was going to face what came next on her feet if she could manage it. Something in Ezra's chest that had been frozen for 3 years cracked. He adjusted his aim 2 inches right to account for wind, breathed out slow, let his heart find the space between beats. Fired. The sound rolled across the canyon like thunder. The rightmost rider flew backward off his horse dead before he hit the ground. Headshot, clean. The other 3 riders spun in their saddles looking for the shooter. By then, Ezra was already moving, sliding down the backside of the ridge, using a game trail only he and the deer knew about. Shadow ran beside him, sure-footed on the loose scree. Behind them, men shouted. Horses whinnied. Ezra didn't look back. He reached the woman before Kane's men figured out where the shot had come from. She was on her feet again, knife in hand, the blade pointed straight at Ezra's chest. Stay back, she hissed. Her voice was steady despite the blood running down her arm. I won't let you take it. Ezra stopped 10 feet away, hands visible, rifle pointed at the ground. Up close, he could see she was maybe 30, with dark brown eyes and a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't twisted with pain and exhaustion. Lady, he said quietly, I just killed one of the men chasing you. If I wanted what you're carrying, I'd have let them catch you first. She studied him. Her knife didn't waver. You're not with Kane. Hell no. Then who are you today? Just a trapper who made a bad decision. Can you ride? She looked at her wounded shoulder, then back at him. I can do anything I need to do. Despite everything, Ezra felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Stubborn and bleeding. Wonderful. I've survived worse. Not if you stay here, you won't. From up the canyon came the sound of hoofbeats. 3 riders coming fast. Ezra whistled. Shadow appeared from the rocks, and behind him came Storm, Ezra's Mustang. The horse was gray as winter clouds, 14 hands high, with a temperament that matched his owner. Solitary, reliable, mean when he needed to be. Get on, Ezra said, swinging into the saddle. The woman hesitated. Her eyes went to the canyon mouth where dust was rising. Back to Ezra. She made her choice. Help me up. He reached down. She grabbed his forearm with her good hand knife still in the other, and he pulled her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's rump, wrapped her free arm around Ezra's waist, and held on. If you drop me, she said through gritted teeth, I'm haunting you. If I drop you, we'll both be dead. He kicked Storm into motion. The horse lunged forward, found his footing on the rocky ground, and ran. Behind them, gunfire erupted. A bullet hissed past Ezra's ear and split a pine branch ahead. Another kicked up dirt near Storm's hooves. "Duck!" Ezra growled. The woman pressed herself against his back. He could feel her breath hot through his shirt, could feel the tremor in her arm that said she was fighting to stay conscious. They hit the narrow section of the canyon, a gap in the rocks barely 4 feet wide. Devil's Throat, the trappers called it. Ezra had found it 2 years back while tracking elk. The passage ran 30 yards through solid stone, twisted twice, and came out on the far side of the ridge. Behind them, the shooting stopped. Kane's men wouldn't follow through a choke point where one man could hold off an army. Storm slowed to a walk, picking his way through the narrow space. Rock walls pressed in on both sides. Above the sky was a thin strip of gray. The woman's grip on Ezra's waist loosened slightly. "Don't pass out," he said. "Not yet." "I'm fine." "You're lying." "Yes." They emerged from Devil's Throat onto a slope covered in lodgepole pine. Ezra reined Storm to a halt and turned in the saddle. Behind them, back at the canyon entrance, he could see 3 riders milling around. One of them raised his rifle. Ezra urged Storm behind a thick stand of trees, reached into his saddlebag, and pulled out 2 sticks of dynamite left over from the time he'd needed to clear a beaver dam. He'd been saving them. Seemed like a good time to use them. He lit the fuses, waited 3 seconds, then hurled both sticks toward the canyon entrance. They arced through the air, trailing smoke. "Ride," Ezra said, and Storm ran. Behind them, the world turned into thunder. When Ezra looked back, the entrance to Devil's Throat was buried under 20 tons of rock.
And danger.
The woman
Tides
coughed.
much.
"You just sealed the only way through." "There's 3 other ways," Ezra said. "They don't know that." She was quiet for a moment, then softly, "Thank you." Ezra didn't answer. He guided Storm down the slope, heading for his cabin. The woman's grip had gone slack. She was unconscious now, her weight heavy against his back. Shadow ranged ahead, nose to the ground, leading them home. The cabin sat in a clearing, surrounded by pine and aspen, small and solid, and exactly where Ezra had left it. He pulled Storm to a halt near the door, dismounted carefully, and caught the woman as she slid from the saddle. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Her breathing was shallow. "You picked the damnedest times to sleep," he muttered, carrying her inside. The cabin was cold. The fire had burned down to embers while he'd been out. Ezra laid the woman on the table, the only surface big enough, and worked quickly. Built up the fire, filled a basin with water from the barrel, found his medical kit, the one he'd put together after Sarah died and then never used because there was nobody left to save. He cut away the shoulder of her habit with his skinning knife. The wound underneath was a grazed bullet had torn through the meat of her shoulder without hitting bone. Lucky. An inch lower and it would have shattered her collarbone. An inch higher and it would have opened her neck. He cleaned the wound with whiskey. The woman gasped, eyes snapping open. "Easy," Ezra said. "I'm not the enemy." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, relaxed slightly. He heated a needle in the fire, threaded it with fishing line, and started stitching. 8 stitches, neat and close. The woman didn't make a sound, but her knuckles went white where she gripped the edge of the table. When he tied off the last stitch, she let out a long breath. "You've done this before," she said. "Army medic taught me, long time ago." "What's your name?" "Ezra Blackwood." "I'm Grace Hammond. Sister Grace if you're formal, just Grace if you're not." Ezra wrapped her shoulder in clean cloth, tied it tight. "You hungry, Sister Grace?" "Starving." He helped her sit up, then moved to the stove. There was stew from yesterday, venison and wild onions, and potato thick enough to eat with a spoon. He heated it up, poured 2 bowls, handed her one. They ate in silence for a while. The only sounds were the fire crackling and spoons scraping tin. Finally, Grace spoke. "Why did you help me?" Ezra stared into his bowl. "Don't know. Bad habit, I guess." "Most people would have kept walking." "Yeah, but you didn't." "No." She set her bowl down, wincing as the movement pulls at her shoulder. "The men chasing me. You know them?" "I know the one in the black coat. Silas Kane. He's a land speculator. Mining interests. Also happens to be a murdering bastard." "You have history with him." It wasn't a question. Ezra took a long time answering. When he did, his voice was flat. 2 years ago, Red Cloud's War, I was scouting for the army near Fort Phil Kearny. We had orders to negotiate peace with the Lakota. Kane was a civilian contractor. He wanted war. Said Indians killed his brother in some raid back in '64, and he wanted revenge. One night he set fire to the Peace Council's lodge, killed 30 people, women, children. I tried to stop him. Got knocked out for my trouble. By the time I woke up, Kane was gone and the army was covering it up. Grace's eyes widened. You reported him? Yeah, army said there wasn't enough evidence. Kane had connections, money. I was just a scout with a story nobody wanted to hear. So you left. So I left. Silence settled between them, heavy with things unsaid. Grace reached for the leather bundle she'd been carrying. It lay on the bench beside her, still wrapped tight. She touched it lightly, like it might break. This is what they want, she said quietly. This is why Father McAllister and Brother Paul are dead. What is it? She unwrapped the leather slowly. Inside was a piece of tanned hide, old and soft with handling. Burned into its surface were markings. A map. Chief Walking Bear of the Shoshone gave this to Father McAllister 3 weeks ago, the day before he died. It shows the location of Sacred Valley, a place the Shoshone have protected for generations. There's a spring there fed by an underground river. It never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. The water keeps their crops alive, keeps their children alive. To them, it's life itself. Ezra studied the map. The markings were simple but precise. Mountains, rivers, a valley marked with a symbol that might have been a spring or might have been something else. Let me guess, he said. Kane thinks it's gold. Or silver. The rumors say there's ore in the valley. Chief Walking Bear made this map to share the water with white settlers if they needed it. A gesture of peace. But men like Kane, she trailed off. Men like Kane see resources to exploit. Yes, Ezra handed the map back. So why give it to a Catholic priest? Because Chief Walking Bear trusted Father McAllister. The father had been bringing medicine to the Shoshone for 5 years. Never asked for anything in return. Never tried to convert them. Just helped. The chief wanted the map in hands he could trust. And Kane found out. 3 days ago, he ambushed our wagon on the road to South Pass City, killed Father McAllister and Brother Paul before I could even scream. I ran. He chased. You know the rest. Ezra walked to the window, looked out at the darkening sky. Storm was in the lean-to, unsaddled and fed. Shadow lay by the door, eyes half closed, but ears alert. You can't stay here, he said. I know. Kane's got resources, men, money. He'll tear this mountain apart looking for you. I know that too. So what's your plan? Grace stood unsteady but determined. I take the map to the Shoshone, give it back to Chief Walking Bear's son. Let them decide what to do with it. You won't make it 5 miles. Then I die trying. Ezra turned from the window. In the firelight, Grace looked young and old at the same time. Young in her face, old in her eyes. You always this stubborn, he asked. Always. And if I said you were staying here until that shoulder heals, I'd say you don't give me orders. They stared at each other. Neither blinked. Outside, Shadow growled low. We're moved to the window in one smooth motion, rifle in hand. Through the trees, maybe 500 yards out, he could see a flicker of orange. Campfire. They found us, he said. Grace was beside him, looking over his shoulder. How many? Can't tell. But if Kane brought his usual crew, we're looking at 15, maybe 20 men. We can't fight that many. No, we can't. So what do we do? Ezra checked the loads in his rifle. Full magazine. He had maybe 60 rounds of ammunition in the cabin. Not enough for a siege, but enough to make a point. We make them regret coming, he said. Grace pulled her Derringer from a pocket in her habit. The gun was small, 2 barrels, probably .32 caliber. Not much stopping power, but at close range, it would do the job. Ezra stared at her. Where the hell did a nun get a pistol? My husband was a cavalry lieutenant. He taught me to shoot before he died at Little Bighorn. Said the frontier doesn't care about vows. Smart man. He was. Shadow growled again. Ezra could see movement in the trees now. Shadows against shadows. At least 3 men, maybe more, circling the cabin. They're scouting, Ezra said. Testing our defenses. Won't attack tonight, but they'll be here at dawn. How do you know? Because that's what I do. He moved away from the window, started gathering supplies. Ammunition, jerky, canteen, the map wrapped in its leather. "What are you doing?" Grace asked. "Preparing to leave." "I thought you said they'd attack at dawn." "They will, which is why we're leaving at midnight." He looked at her. In the firelight, her face was set with determination that reminded him of Sarah. That same stubborn refusal to back down even when backing down was the smart choice. "Get some rest," he said. "You're going to need it." Grace sat down on the bench, leaned back against the wall. Within minutes, exhaustion pulled her under. Ezra stood watch by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the distant campfire burn. Shadow pressed against his leg, warm and solid. 3 years, Ezra whispered. 3 years of peace, and I throw it away for a woman I don't know and a map I don't care about. Shadow looked up at him. "Yeah," Ezra said. "I know, I'm an idiot." Outside, the wind picked up. Snow started to fall, light at first, then heavier. By midnight, it would be a full storm. Ezra checked his pocket watch. 9 o'clock. 3 hours until they moved. He settled in to wait. At 11:30, hoofbeats. Ezra was at the window before Shadow could bark, rifle ready. Through the falling snow, he could make out a single rider approaching. Not one of Kane's men. This horse was smaller, the rider sitting easy in the saddle, no weapon drawn. The rider stopped 50 yards from the cabin and called out, "Ezra Blackwood, it's Marshal Hayes, I'm coming in." Ezra recognized the voice. Owen Hayes, federal marshal out of South Pass City. They'd crossed paths a few times over the years. Hayes was honest, which made him rare. Also made him dangerous in his own way, because honest men had a habit of doing their jobs even when it was inconvenient. "Come ahead slow," Ezra called back. "Keep your hands where I can seat them." Hayes dismounted, walked his horse to the lean-to tied next to Storm. He was a tall man, mid-40s, with a gray beard and eyes that didn't miss much. He knocked on the cabin door. Ezra opened it. "Marshal?" "Ezra, heard you were dead." "Working on it." Hayes stepped inside, snow dusting his coat. He saw Grace sleeping on the bench and nodded to himself. "Sister Grace, been looking for her for 2 days. Found her." "So I see. Mind telling me how?" Ezra gestured to the table. They sat. He poured coffee, and Hayes wrapped his hands around the cup like he needed the warmth. 3 days back, Hayes said, Father McAllister and Brother Paul were escorting Sister Grace from Fort Bridger to South Pass City. They were carrying something. Something Chief Walking Bear gave them before he died. "The map." Hayes nodded. "So you know. Then you also know Silas Kane's been hunting for it. Killed the priests, shot Sister Grace. Now he's camped half a mile from here with 18 men waiting to finish the job." 18, Ezra repeated. "You counted?" "I can add." "You here to arrest me, Marshal?" Hayes took a long drink of coffee. "For what, saving a woman's life? That's not illegal, last I checked. For killing one of Kane's men. Self-defense. Besides, the man you killed was wanted in 3 territories for murder. You did me a favor." "So why are you here?" Hayes set his cup down. "Because Silas Kane is a powerful man with powerful friends. He's telling everyone that Sister Grace stole property that belongs to him, that you're harboring a thief, and unless I bring both of you in, he's going to burn every cabin between here and South Pass City until somebody gives you up." Grace stirred on the bench, waking. She sat up slowly, wincing at her shoulder. "Marshal Hayes," she said, "I remember you. You came to the mission last year, brought news about the Fetterman massacre." "Sister," Hayes nodded to her, "you're looking better than last time I heard about you, which was probably dead in a ditch somewhere. I'm harder to kill than that. So I'm learning." Ezra leaned back in his chair. "What do you want from us, Marshal?" "Honestly, I want you gone. Out of my jurisdiction, out of Kane's reach, preferably before he starts a war. I can't stop." "Where would we go?" "The Shoshone Winter Camp is 40 miles northwest. If you can get the map to Thomas Red Cloud, Walking Bear's son, he can protect it. And you. 40 miles through snow with Kane hunting us," Ezra said. "That's a hell of a ride." "You got a better idea?" Ezra looked at Grace. She met his eyes. "We leave at midnight," she said, "like you planned." Hayes stood. "Then I was never here. Far as anyone knows, I checked this cabin, found it empty, moved on." "Kane won't believe that." "Don't care. I took an oath to uphold the law, not to help murderers hunt nuns." He headed for the door, paused with his hand on the latch. Ezra, you were a good scout back in the day. One of the best. But this ain't the army anymore. Out here, you're just one man. I know. One man against 18 is bad odds. I've had worse. Hayes shook his head. Get her to the Shoshone. After that, stay alive long enough for me to clean up this mess. He left. The sound of his horse faded into the storm. Grace stood testing her shoulder. We should go now, before Kane moves. Not yet. Storm needs rest. And so do you. I'm fine. You're lying again. She smiled despite herself. Yes. Ezra banked the fire, packed the last of the supplies. At 1:45, he saddled Storm and helped Grace mount up. She settled behind him, her good arm around his waist. Shadow stood by the door waiting. Let's go, Ezra said. They slipped out the back of the cabin into the storm heading northwest. Behind them, the campfires burned. Ahead, the mountains waited. And somewhere in the darkness, Silas Kane was hunting. But for tonight, for these few hours, Ezra Blackwood rode through snow and wind with a woman he barely knew pressed against his back, and a purpose he hadn't felt in 3 years. He didn't know if they'd make it to the Shoshone camp. Didn't know if the map would save anyone. Didn't know if he'd survive the next 40 miles. But for the first time since the fire took Sarah and Daniel, Ezra Blackwood knew he was alive, and that he thought was enough. The storm came in like a living thing swallowing the night whole. Ezra guided Storm through pine forests so thick the snow barely reached the ground, following trails only he knew existed. Behind him, Grace held on with her good arm, her body pressed against his back for warmth. Shadow ranged ahead, a gray phantom in the white darkness. They'd been riding for 2 hours when Grace spoke for the first time since leaving the cabin. Where are we going? Northwest Ridge, Ezra said. There's an old trapper's shelter up there. We can wait out the storm, let Storm rest. How far? Another hour if the snow doesn't get worse. It got worse. By the time they reached the shelter, visibility was down to 10 feet and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. The shelter was barely more than a lean-to built against a rock face, but it had a roof and 3 walls. And that was enough. Ezra helped Grace down from the horse. She stumbled, caught herself against Storm's flank. Easy, Ezra said. I'm fine. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it less true. He led Storm under the shelter's overhang, unsaddled him, rubbed him down with dry pine needles. The horse was exhausted, foam on his neck, breathing hard. But his eyes were clear and his legs were sound. Good horse. Ezra had bought him from a crow trader 5 years back for 3 beaver pelts and a Henry rifle. Best trade he ever made. Grace sat against the rock wall, eyes closed. Her face was pale in the dim light. Ezra knelt beside her, touched her forehead. Warm. Not fevered yet, but heading that way. Let me see your shoulder. She opened her eyes. It's fine. Show me anyway. She sighed, started to unwrap the bandage. Her fingers fumbled with the knot. Ezra brushed her hand aside, did it himself. The stitches were holding, but the skin around them was red and hot to the touch. Infected, Grace asked. Just starting to be. He had willow bark in his pack, good for fever and pain. He crushed it between 2 rocks, mixed it with snowmelt, made her drink it.
This
She
valley's
grimaced
alive with
at the
wonder.
taste, but finished
And
it.
danger. The mist
Get
hides
some
much.
sleep,
Stay
he
close.
said.
I will.
I'll keep watch. Wake me in 2 hours. We should trade off. We'll see. He settled near the shelter's opening, rifle across his knees. Shadow curled up beside him, head on pause but ears alert. The storm howled outside like all the fury of winter given voice. Ezra thought about the cabin he'd left behind. 3 years of carefully built solitude gone in a single afternoon, because he'd made the mistake of caring whether a stranger lived or died. Part of him wanted to be angry about that. The rest of him just felt tired. Grace's breathing deepened into sleep. Storm shifted, his weight, tail swishing. Shadow's ears twitched at some sound Ezra couldn't hear. Just wind, boy, Ezra murmured. But it wasn't wind. Shadow was on his feet, hackles raised, staring into the storm. A low growl built in his throat. Ezra moved to the shelter's edge, peered into the whiteout. For a long moment he saw nothing. Then at the very edge of visibility, a shadow moving wrong. Too deliberate, too purposeful. Someone was out there. Ezra raised his rifle, sighted on the movement. Waited. The shadow resolved into a man walking slow through knee-deep snow. He wore furs and carried a rifle. But he wasn't aiming it, wasn't even holding it ready. He walked like a man who knew exactly where he was going. Ezra recognized the walk before he recognized the face. Joseph Crow, the man who taught Ezra half of what he knew about tracking. The man Ezra had saved from freezing to death at Crazy Woman Fork back in '66. The man who should have been 200 miles north with the Crow tribe not walking through a Wyoming blizzard in the middle of the night. Joseph stopped 20 feet from the shelter, close enough to see Ezra, too far for a conversation without shouting. "Ghost Walker," Joseph called, using Ezra's old scout name. "I know you're in there." Ezra stepped out from the shelter, rifle ready but not aimed. "Joseph Crow, long way from home. Could say the same about you. This is my home now." Joseph smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Home is where you hide, you mean. Where you drink yourself stupid and pretend the world ended with your family." The words hit like a physical blow. Ezra's grip tightened on his rifle. "What do you want, Joseph?" "Just delivering a message from my employer." "Kane. Silas Kane, yes, he wants the woman and the map. Give them up right away. Nobody else has to die. And if I don't, then everyone dies. You, her, every trapper and settler within 20 miles. Kane's got 18 men and enough ammunition to fight a war. What do you have, a half-wolf dog and a guilty conscience?" Ezra studied his old friend. Joseph looked older than he should, hard years etched in the lines around his eyes. "Why are you working for him?" Ezra asked quietly. "After Sand Creek, after everything the Army did, why side with a man like Kane?" Joseph's jaw tightened. "Because men like Kane pay in gold, not promises. Because my people are starving on land the government gave us after taking our real land. Because I got tired of fighting for nothing." "So you fight for money instead. At least money's honest." They stood in the snow, two men who'd once been brothers, now on opposite sides of a line neither wanted to cross. "Tell Kane," Ezra said, "that if he wants the woman and the map, he can come take them himself. I'll be waiting." Joseph shook his head slowly. "You always were a fool, Ghost Walker. Thought you'd learned after your family died. Thought you'd figured out that some battles aren't worth fighting. This one is. Why, she's nothing to you. That map is nothing to you. Why die for it?" Ezra thought about that, about Sarah and Daniel, about 3 years of empty days and emptier nights, about Grace sitting in his shelter right now, wounded and exhausted but still fighting. "Because I'm tired of letting people die when I could save them," he said. Joseph studied him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back into the storm. "See you at dawn, Ghost Walker," he called over his shoulder. "Try not to die before I get there." Then he was gone, swallowed by snow and darkness. Ezra stood there until he couldn't feel his feet anymore. Shadow pressed against his leg, warm and solid. "We're in trouble, boy," Ezra said. Shadow whined agreement. Grace was awake when Ezra came back into the shelter. She sat with her back against the rock, Derringer in her lap, eyes alert. "I heard voices," she said. "Joseph Crow, old friend, works for Kane now. What did he want? To offer us a chance to surrender. I assume you declined." Seemed like the thing to do. Grace was quiet for a moment. Outside, the storm raged on. "Tell me about him," she said. "Joseph Crow." Ezra sat down, checked his rifle by habit. "Met him in '64. I was scouting for the Army. He was guiding wagon trains. Half Crow, half white. Grew up between two worlds, never quite fitting in either one. But he could track like nobody I ever met. Could read sign most men couldn't even see. We rode together for 2 years. Saved each other's lives more than once." "What happened?" "Sand Creek, November '64. I was scouting near Fort Lyon when Colonel Chivington decided to attack a peaceful Cheyenne village. Joseph was there visiting relatives. I tried to warn them, tried to stop it. Got knocked unconscious for my trouble. When I woke up, 700 cavalry had killed 200 Cheyenne, mostly women and children. Joseph's grandmother was one of them." Grace drew in a sharp breath. "And after that," Ezra continued, "Joseph stopped trusting the Army, stopped trusting white men in general. Can't say I blame him. I reported what happened. Army buried the report. Chivington got promoted. I resigned my commission and tried to forget about it." But Joseph didn't forget. No, Joseph remembered. And now he's working for a man like Kane because at least Kane's honest about being a bastard. They sat in silence. The wind howled. Storm shifted in his sleep. "I'm sorry," Grace said quietly, for making you part of this. Ezra looked at her. You didn't make me do anything. I chose. Why? It was the second time someone had asked him that tonight. Ezra still didn't have a good answer. Don't know, he said. Maybe I'm tired of choosing wrong. Grace reached out with her good hand, touched his arm briefly. Thank you for choosing it all. Her hand was warm even through his sleeve. Ezra felt something shift in his chest like ice cracking in a spring thaw. Get some rest, he said, voice rougher than he meant it. We move at first light. We're back to my cabin. She frowned. I thought we were heading to the Shoshone camp. We were, but Kane's got Joseph tracking us. We won't make it 10 miles before they run us down. So we go back, make our stand where I know the terrain. Against 18 men. Against however many they send. Grace studied his face in the dim light. You're planning something. I'm planning to make them bleed for every foot of ground. That's not a plan, that's suicide. Ezra smiled without humor. Little bit of both. They reached the cabin 2 hours before dawn. The storm had blown itself out, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The sky was clear stars, bright as chips of ice. Ezra could see the campfires from half a mile away. 3 of them positioned in a rough triangle around his cabin. Smart. Kane was covering all the approaches. They're waiting for us, Grace said. Good. Saves us the trouble of finding them. He guided Storm wide, coming at the cabin from the south where the ground rose steep enough that horses couldn't climb it. They left Storm in a sheltered ravine with enough browse to keep him occupied and made the last quarter mile on foot. Shadow ranged ahead, silent as smoke. Ezra moved the way Joseph had taught him, stepping on rocks, where his weight wouldn't leave prints, using trees for cover, breathing slow and quiet. Grace followed in his footsteps, moving better than she had any right to, with a wounded shoulder and no sleep. She was tougher than she looked, tougher than most men Ezra had known. They reached the cabin's back door without being seen. Ezra listened at the wood, heard nothing. He eased the door open, a rifle ready. The cabin was empty, exactly as he'd left it. The fire was cold, but everything else was untouched. Kane's men had surrounded the place but hadn't searched it. Too confident, too sure Ezra would run. We're going to die here, aren't we? Grace said quietly. Ezra began gathering supplies, ammunition, jerky, water, the spare rifle he kept hidden under the floorboards. Maybe, he said, but we'll take enough of them with us that Kane remembers this day for the rest of his life. Grace set the leather-wrapped map on the table, looked at it for a long moment. There's something I need to tell you, she said, about the map. Can it wait? No. Ezra stopped packing, looked at her. Grace unwrapped the leather. Inside, as Ezra had seen before, was the piece of tanned hide with its burned markings. But now Grace reached deeper into the wrapping and pulled out a second piece of hide. Same size, same markings. Almost. Chief Walking Bear made 2 maps, Grace said quietly. One real, one false. The real map leads to Sacred Valley. The false map leads to a box canyon 10 miles east. No water, no exit, just a dead end. Ezra stared at her. You've been carrying 2 maps this whole time. Yes. And you didn't think to mention it. Would you have trusted a stranger who appeared out of nowhere with the truth about something this important? Ezra wanted to be angry, couldn't quite manage it. She was right. Which one does Kane think you have? He asked. He doesn't know there are 2. Father McAllister only showed him the real map once for a few seconds before he realized Kane wanted it for the wrong reasons. Kane's been chasing rumors and fragments ever since. So if we gave him the false map, he'd walk straight into a trap of his own making. Ezra picked up the false map, studied it. The differences were subtle. A stream that bent left instead of right. A mountain peak that was marked too far north. Someone who didn't know the land intimately would never spot the mistakes. That's cold-blooded, he said. So is murdering priests. Fair point. He wrapped both maps carefully, tucked them into his coat. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten. Dawn coming. Here's how this plays out, Ezra said. They'll hit us at first light. Full assault, all 18 men if Kane's smart. We can't hold the cabin against that many, so we don't try. Then what do? We make them come to us on ground we choose, and we hurt them so bad they think twice about following when we run. He began moving through the cabin with purpose, gathering rope wire tools. Grace watched for a moment, then started helping without being asked. They worked in silence, the easy coordination of two people who understood the stakes. By the time the sun touched the eastern peaks, they'd set 6 traps around the cabin's perimeter. Pitfalls covered with pine branches and snow. Tripwires connected to deadfalls. Caltrops made from bent nails scattered along the likely approach roads. "It's not much," Ezra said, surveying their work. "It'll have to be enough." They returned to the cabin. Ezra barred the door, checked the loads in both rifles. Grace sat by the window, derringer in hand. "Have you ever killed anyone?" Ezra asked. "No. Might have to today." "I know. It changes you." Grace looked at him. Her eyes were steady. "I changed the night Father McAllister died in front of me. The night I ran through a snowstorm with a bullet in my shoulder. I'm not the woman who joined the sisters 2 years ago. That woman died somewhere on the road to South Pass City. Who are you now?" She considered the question. "Someone who fights." Ezra nodded. That was answer enough. Shadow, who'd been lying by the cold fireplace, suddenly raised his head. His ears went forward. A low growl built in his throat. "They're coming," Ezra said. He moved to the window. Through the morning light, he could see movement in the trees. Lots of movement. Men on horseback spreading out surrounding the cabin. And at their center, sitting easy on a black horse, was Silas Kane. Even at 200 yards, Ezra could see the smile on Kane's face. "Blackwood?" Kane's voice carried across the clearing. "I know you're in there. Come out now, and I'll let the woman live." Ezra said nothing, just watched. "No," Kane continued. "Well then, boys, burn it down." 3 men rode forward, torches in hand. Ezra took careful aim, squeezed the trigger. The rightmost rider flew backward out of his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. The other 2 riders pulled up short. "That's one," Ezra shouted. "Send the rest. I got plenty of bullets." Kane's smile never wavered. He raised his hand, gave a signal, and hell came to the cabin in the snow. They came from 3 directions at once, northeast and west. 6 men per group, riding hard rifles, firing. Ezra shot the lead rider on the north approach. The man tumbled from his horse and the animal panicked, running back the way it came, carrying 2 more riders with it in the chaos. Grace fired through the east window. Her derringer barked twice. One of the riders grabbed his shoulder, wheeled his horse around. "Reload," Ezra shouted, already working the lever on his rifle. The western approach hit the first trap, a pitfall. 2 horses went down, throwing their riders into the snow. One man didn't get up. The other crawled, leg bent at a wrong angle. The remaining riders pulled up short, suddenly cautious. "They're not stupid," Grace said, thumbing fresh rounds into her derringer. "No, but they're committed now." The second wave came on foot, slower, more careful, fanning out to make themselves harder targets. One man triggered a tripwire. The deadfall came down in a roar of rocks and timber. He had time for half a scream before 200 pounds of stone buried him. The others froze. "Pull back," someone shouted. "Pull back and regroup," Ezra counted as they withdrew. 14 men, which meant 4 were down. Not dead necessarily, but out of the fight. Good odds, considering. "They'll try the south approach next," he said. "The cliffside. You said it was too steep for horses." "It is, but men can climb it if they're desperate enough." He left Grace watching the north and east windows, went to check the south wall. Sure enough, he could see movement down in the ravine. Men leaving their horses, starting to climb. Ezra had prepared for this. A single rope secured to a tree trunk running down the cliff face. He drew his knife, started sawing through it. Below, the first climber was halfway up, using handholds in the rock. 2 more behind him. Ezra cut the last strand of rope. The lead climber grabbed for it, found nothing, flailed. He fell 20 feet, hit hard, didn't move. The other 2 climbers pressed themselves against the rock face, not going up or down, just holding on. "South is secure," Ezra called to Grace. "North and east are quiet, too quiet." Ezra returned to her window, looked out. She was right. The men had pulled back to the tree line, waiting. "What are they doing?" Grace asked. "Thinking. Kane lost 4 men in 10 minutes. He's reassessing." "Will he retreat?" "No, he's committed, but he'll try something different now." They didn't have to wait long to find out what. The arrow came through the window so fast Ezra almost didn't see it. It buried itself in the far wall tail, feathers quivering. Wrapped around the shaft was a piece of cloth. Grace unwrapped it, read what was written there. "It's from Joseph Crow," she said. "He's giving us 1 hour to surrender." After that, they burned the cabin with us inside. Ezra looked at the sun, still early morning. Plenty of day left for dying.
This
"How
valley's
much
alive with
ammunition do
wonder.
we have?"
And
Grace asked.
danger. The mist
"Maybe
hides much.
40 rounds
Stay
total.
close.
I will.
Not enough for a siege. Then we have to run, where they've got the cabin surrounded. Horses on all sides. The moment we step outside, they'll ride us down." Grace stood paced to the window and back. Her shoulder was bleeding again, fresh red soaking through the bandage. But her eyes were clear, sharp. "Unless they're not watching," she said slowly. "They're always watching. Not if they're busy." Ezra looked at her. "What are you thinking? We give them what they want, or what they think they want." She picked up the false map from the table, held it up. "We make them believe I'm trying to run. I go out the front door waving this map, shouting surrender. They'll focus on me. That's when you slip out the back with the real map in shadow. Head for the Shoshone camp while they're distracted. They'll kill you. Maybe. Or maybe Kane wants me alive to make sure the map is real. That's a hell of a gamble. You have a better idea." Ezra didn't, which was the problem. He thought about it, turned it over in his mind looking for holes, found plenty, but couldn't find anything better. "I don't like it," he said. "You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me." Trust. That was the word that stuck. Ezra hadn't trusted anyone in 3 years, hadn't let himself. Trust meant caring. Caring meant loss. Loss meant the kind of pain he'd been drinking himself numb to avoid. But looking at Grace now wounded and exhausted, but still fighting, still thinking, still refusing to give up, Ezra realized something. He already cared, had cared since the moment he pulled that trigger on the ridge. Maybe before. "There's a cave," he said quietly, "quarter-mile northwest, hidden entrance behind a waterfall. If you can get there, you can hide until nightfall. Then head west to Red Dalton's trading post. She'll help you." I thought we were both running. "We are, different directions. Splits their forces, better odds." Grace studied his face. "You're lying. You're planning to draw them off. Let them chase you while I escape." "Does it matter, Mom?" "Yes." "Why?" She didn't answer for a long moment. When she did, her voice was soft. "Because I'm tired of people dying for me." Ezra thought about Sarah and Daniel, about 3 years of guilt and whiskey and wishing he'd died in that fire with them. "And I'm tired of people dying because I wasn't there," he said. "So maybe this time I will be." Before Grace could argue, the door exploded inward. No warning, no knock, just splintering wood and 3 men rushing through, rifles raised. Ezra shot the first one center mass. The man went down. Grace shot the second one, her derringer barking in the confined space. He grabbed his leg, fell. The third man got his rifle up, aimed at Grace. Shadow hit him from the side, 70 pounds of fury and fangs. They went down together, man screaming, dog snarling. Ezra crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed the man's rifle, yanked it away. The man fumbled for a knife. Shadow's jaws closed on his wrist. "Call him off, John," the man screamed. "Call him off." Ezra pressed his rifle barrel against the man's forehead. "Where's Kane?" "Go to hell. Shadow doesn't need to kill you, just needs to keep chewing. How long you think you can hold out?" The man's face went white. "East side behind the big pine, he's watching through a spyglass." Ezra whistled. Shadow released the man's wrist, backed off. The man curled around his mangled hand, whimpering. "Grace," Ezra said, "tie him up and check the other 2. She moved to obey. The first man Ezra had shot was dead. The second, the one Grace had hit, was alive but wouldn't be walking for a while. She bound both of them with rope from Ezra's supplies. Ezra went to the window, looked out carefully. There behind the big pine on the east side, he could see a flash of black coat. Kane, watching, waiting. "He's not coming himself," Ezra said. "He's sending his men to die while he watches." Coward. Smart, if you can afford to be. Outside, he could hear shouting. The men were regrouping, preparing for another assault. "We're out of time," Grace said. She was right. The cabin had 2 dead men in it, 1 wounded, and the door was blown open. They couldn't hold it. Ezra made his decision. "New plan," he said. "We both run. Out the back. Right now, make for the cave. If we're lucky, the confusion buys us 5 minutes. If we're not, at least we go down fighting. Ezra grabbed his pack, the real map, secure in his coat. Grace took the false map, tucked it in her habit, where it would be visible if someone searched her. Stay close, Ezra said. Don't stop for anything. Not even you. Especially not me. He whistled for Shadow. The dog was at his side instantly. They went out the back door into morning light that seemed too bright, too clear, too honest for what was about to happen. And behind them, Silas Kane's men realized their prey was running. The hunt was on. They made it 200 yards before the first shots rang out. Ezra heard the bullets hit trees around them, heard men shouting, heard the thunder of hoofbeats as riders spurred their horses into pursuit. Don't look back, he shouted to Grace. Just run. The forest was thick here, pine and aspen, growing so close together a horse could barely pass between them. That was the only thing keeping them alive. Kane's men had to dismount, chase on foot, and on foot Ezra knew how to disappear. He led Grace through a creek, the ice breaking under their boots, the cold water shocking. Up a slope where loose shale made footing treacherous. Down into a ravine where deadfall created a maze of fallen timber. Behind them, the pursuit was getting closer. Shadow ranged ahead, choosing the path leading them through terrain that got rougher with every step. Ezra could hear Grace's breathing, ragged and harsh. Her shoulder had to be agony. But she kept moving, kept up, didn't slow down. A man appeared from behind a boulder, rifle raised. Ezra shot him without breaking stride. The man fell and they were past him, running again. Another man, this one ahead, trying to cut them off. Grace fired her derringer. Missed. The man aimed at her. Shadow hit him low, going for the legs. The man's shot went wild. Ezra was on him before he could aim again, using the rifle butt as a club. The man went down and stayed down. How many? Grace gasped. Don't know. Keep moving. They burst out of the forest onto open ground. Bad. No cover. But the cave entrance was close now, just across this meadow, behind the frozen waterfall where ice hung like curtains. Ezra risked a look back. 6 men, maybe 7, coming through the trees. And behind them more. Run, Ezra shouted. They ran. The meadow was 100 yards across. Might as well have been a mile. Every step felt like moving through honey. Every breath burned. Gunfire erupted behind them. A bullet kicked up snow near Ezra's feet. Another sang past his ear. 50 yards to the waterfall. Grace stumbled, caught herself, kept going. 25 yards. A bullet caught Ezra's pack, spun him halfway around. He kept his feet, kept moving. 10 yards. Shadow reached the waterfall, first disappeared behind the ice. 5 yards. Grace hit the curtain of frozen water and went through. Ezra followed, turning as he did, firing blind back toward the meadow. 3 shots fast as he could work the lever. Heard a man scream, good. Then he was through into darkness and cold, and the sound of water running behind walls of ice. The cave mouth was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. But inside it opened up into a space the size of a small room. Light filtered through the ice, turning everything blue and strange. Grace collapsed against the far wall, chest heaving. Ezra pressed himself against the cave mouth, looking out through the ice. The men had stopped at the edge of the meadow. 7 of them, maybe 8. They were spread out, rifles ready, but not advancing, because they'd seen where their quarry had gone, and they knew there was only one way out. We're trapped, Grace said, reading his expression. Yeah. How long can we hold out? Ezra checked his ammunition. 12 rounds left in the rifle, 6 in his revolver. Grace's derringer was empty. Not long enough. Outside, the men were setting up a perimeter, not trying to rush the cave, just waiting. They didn't need to assault. They just needed to keep Ezra and Grace pinned until Kane arrived with the rest of his men. Then it would be over. Grace pulled the false map from her habit, looked at it. We could give them this, she said. Throw it out. Tell them it's what they want. They take it and leave. You think Kane will believe that? No, but it might buy us time. Time for what she didn't say. Didn't need to. They both knew there was no rescue coming. No cavalry riding over the hill. No miracle. Just 2 people in a cave running out of bullets and time. Ezra sat down beside Grace, his back against the cold stone. Tell me about him, Grace said quietly. Your son, Daniel. Ezra was quiet for a long time. Outside, the men waited. "He was 8 when he died," Ezra said finally. "Loved to carve things out of wood. Animals mostly. Horses, bears. One time he tried to carve a wolf, spent 2 weeks on it. When he finished, he gave it to Sarah, said it was to protect her while I was away scouting. Did she keep it? Wore it on a string around her neck. Burned with her." Grace reached out, took his hand. Hers was cold. He held it anyway. "I'm sorry," she said. "Yeah, me too." They sat in silence. Shadow pressed against Ezra's other side, warm and solid. "I was supposed to be home that night," Ezra continued. "Was supposed to get back from patrol 2 days earlier. But we ran into a Lakota hunting party, had to take a different route. By the time I got home," he didn't finish, didn't need to. "Sarah was baking bread. Daniel was upstairs doing his studies. Lamp oil spilled, caught fire. Spread so fast, I got there just as the roof caved in. Tried to get inside, but a beam fell across my leg, pinned me. I could hear them screaming. Could hear them calling for me. And I couldn't—" His voice broke. Grace squeezed his hand tighter. 3 years, Ezra said. 3 years I've been asking God why he let them burn. Why he didn't at least let me die with them. Never got an answer, just silence. "Maybe," Grace said quietly, "the answer is sitting right here. Maybe you lived because someone else needed saving. Maybe that's the only reason any of us survive. To be there for the next person who needs us." Ezra looked at her. In the blue light filtering through the ice, she looked young and old at once. Wounded and strong, scared and determined. "I don't want you to die for me," he said. "Then don't die for me either. Fight beside me instead." Before Ezra could answer, Shadow's ears went up. He was staring at the back of the cave, at the darkness there, growling softly. "What is it, boy?" Shadow walked toward the darkness, sniffing, stopped, whined. Ezra stood, walked over. The back of the cave was solid rock, or seemed to be, but when he pressed his hand against it, he felt cold air moving. "Grace," he said, "bring the map, the real one." She came over. He showed her the markings on the hide by the dim light. "This valley," he said, pointing to a symbol near the center. "Sacred Valley, where the spring is. You see this line leading to it?" "Yes." "That's not a river, that's a passage, underground, a cave system. You think this cave connects to it? Only one way to find out." He felt along the rock wall, found a seam where 2 sections of stone met, put his shoulder against it and pushed. The rock moved. Not much, just an inch, but it moved. "Help me," Ezra said. Grace put her good shoulder against the stone. Together they pushed. The rock ground inward, pivoting on some natural hinge opening into darkness. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of deep earth and water. Ezra lit his last match, held it up. The passage beyond was narrow but passable, and it led down into the mountain's heart. "We go this way," he said. "We might find Sacred Valley, or we might find a dead end and die in the dark. Better than dying out here." "Maybe." Outside, one of Kane's men shouted, "Blackwood, we know you're in there. Come out now, or we're coming in." Ezra looked at Grace. She looked back. "Together," she said. "Together." They squeezed through the opening into darkness. Shadow followed without hesitation. Behind them, Ezra heard the men at the cave mouth, heard them arguing about who would go in first. Let them argue. By the time they worked up the courage, Ezra and Grace would be long gone, following a passage that had been here since before white men came to these mountains, following a map that might lead to salvation or doom. Either way, they'd find out together. The passage sloped down into darkness, absolute. Ezra led with one hand on the wall, the other holding Shadow's scruff. Grace followed close behind, her hand on Ezra's shoulder. They walked blind, trusting stone and instinct, leaving Silas Kane and his men behind in the light. And somewhere ahead in the dark beneath the mountain, Sacred Valley waited. The darkness was absolute. Not the darkness of a moonless night, where eyes eventually adjust, but the crushing black of deep earth where light had never reached and never would. Ezra kept his right hand on the cave wall, fingers reading the stone like Braille, feeling for changes in texture that might mean a drop-off or a dead end. Behind him, Grace's hand gripped his shoulder. Her breathing was steady despite the pain she had to be in. Shadow pressed against Ezra's left leg, guiding him with the sureness of an animal that could navigate by senses humans had lost generations ago. They walked for what felt like hours but was probably less than one. The passage sloped steadily downwards, sometimes steep enough that they had to brace against the walls, sometimes leveling out into stretches where the ceiling rose high enough that Ezra couldn't touch it, even reaching up. The air grew warmer as they descended. Not hot, but noticeably less cold than the winter world above. And there was moisture in it, a dampness that spoke of running water somewhere nearby. Ezra, Grace said quietly. Her voice echoed strange in the confined space. Do you know where we're going? Down? That's not reassuring. Wasn't trying to be reassuring, was trying to be honest. She was quiet for a moment. Then, if this passage leads nowhere, if we die down here, I want you to know something. Don't. Don't what? Don't say goodbye. We're not dead yet. But if we are going to die, I'd rather say it now while I can. Ezra stopped walking, turned in the darkness, though he couldn't see her face, could only feel her presence close and warm. Then say it, he said. Thank you for not leaving me on that ridge, for choosing to fight when you could have hidden, for reminding me that some things are worth dying for. We're not dying. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. He started walking again. Grace followed. The passage opened up gradually, the walls pulling away on both sides until Ezra couldn't touch them anymore, even with his arms spread wide. The sound changed too. Their footsteps that had been close and contained now echoed into vastness. And ahead, far ahead, Ezra saw light. Not much, just a faint glow, barely brighter than starlight. But after walking blind for so long it looked like dawn breaking. You see that? He asked. Yes. They moved toward it. The light grew stronger, resolved into an opening in the cave wall ahead. Not large, maybe 4 feet across, but bright enough now that Ezra could make out the shape of the passage around them. They reached the opening and looked through. Ezra's breath caught.
This valley's
Sacred
alive with
Valley.
wonder.
It spread
And
below
danger.
them like
Mist hides
something from a
much.
fever
Stay
dream.
close.
I will.
Steam rose from natural hot springs scattered across the valley floor, creating curtains of mist that glowed in the afternoon light. The springs fed a stream that ran between banks thick with grass, still green despite the winter cold. Pine trees ringed the valley, their branches heavy with snow that seemed to glow in the strange light. And on the valley's far side, carved into the rock face, were pictographs, hundreds of them. Ancient symbols in red and white and black, telling stories in a language Ezra didn't know but could feel the weight of. Dear God, Grace whispered, it's real. They stood there for a long moment, just looking. Below them, the valley was utterly silent. No wind, no birds, just the soft hiss of steam rising from the springs. Then Shadow growled. Ezra's hand went to his rifle before his mind caught up. He scanned the valley, looking for what had alarmed the dog. There, on the valley floor between the springs and the tree line, stood 12 men. They hadn't been there a moment ago, or maybe they had been and Ezra just hadn't seen them against the backdrop of mist and stone. Either way, they were there now, all armed, all watching the cave entrance with the kind of stillness that came from perfect certainty of purpose. And at their center stood a man Ezra recognized even at this distance. Thomas Red Cloud, son of Chief Walking Bear, war leader of the Shoshone. We need to go down there, Grace said. They'll kill us. Maybe, but they're protecting the valley. That means they're protecting the water. That means we're on the same side. They don't know that. Then we tell them. Before Ezra could argue, Grace cupped her hands around her mouth and called down in a voice that carried across the valley. Thomas Red Cloud, I am Sister Grace Hammond. I carry your father's map. We come as friends. The words echoed off the valley walls. The 12 men didn't move, didn't lower their rifles, just watched. Then Thomas raised one hand, made a gesture. The other men lowered their weapons. I think that's an invitation, Grace said. Or a trap. Only one way to find out. She started down the slope before Ezra could stop her. He followed, rifle ready, but not aimed, Shadow close at his heels. The descent took 10 minutes of careful climbing down a slope that was more scree than solid ground. When they reached the valley floor, the 12 Shoshone warriors closed in around them, not threatening but definitely watching. Thomas Red Cloud stepped forward. He was a tall man, mid-40s, with a face that could have been carved, all from the same stone as the valley walls. He wore buckskin and fur and carried a Spencer rifle like he knew how to use it. Ghost Walker, Thomas said in English. His voice was deep and carried no warmth. I know your face. You scouted with my father in the old days, before the wars, before the betrayals. Thomas, Ezra said. He didn't lower his rifle. Been a long time. 15 years. You kept your word then, never spoke of this valley, never brought white men here. Why break silence now? Grace stepped forward before Ezra could answer. She pulled the leather-wrapped map from inside her habit, held it out. Your father gave this to Father McAllister before he died. He wanted it protected from men who would destroy this place for profit. Silas Kane murdered Father McAllister for it. He's hunting us because we won't let him have it. We didn't bring trouble here, Thomas. Trouble followed us. And if we don't stop it now, Kane will find this valley eventually. Thomas studied her. His eyes went to her wounded shoulder, to the blood staining her habit, to the determination in her face. You are the woman the Spirit spoke of, he said quietly. The one who fights for people not her own. My father's vision showed a woman in black carrying water and weapons, standing between our land and those who would poison it. I'm just a nun with a gun, Grace said, but I'll stand between this valley and Kane as long as I'm breathing. Thomas reached out, took the map, unrolled it carefully. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized his father's markings. This is the true map, he said, the one that leads here. My father made another, a false one. Do you have it? Yes, Grace said. I was going to give it to Kane. Let him chase shadows. Thomas smiled for the first time. It wasn't a pleasant smile. My father was wise, and you are clever, but Kane will not give up so easily. He will send men, many men. They will search until they find this place. Then we stop them before they find it, Ezra said. We. You say we. Why do you fight for us, Ghostwalker? My people are not your people. Ezra thought about that, about Sarah and Daniel, about 3 years of running from himself, about Grace standing on a ridge with a bullet in her shoulder refusing to give up. Because I'm tired of letting good people die while bad people take whatever they want, he said. Your father was a good man. This valley is worth protecting. That's reason enough. Thomas studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then we will stand together. When Kane comes, we will be waiting. A sound echoed across the valley, distant, muffled by rock and distance, but unmistakable. Gunfire. Thomas's head snapped up. They are already here, in the tunnels. How many ways into the valley, Ezra asked. 4 passages. We watched 3. The 4th is the one you came through. They must have followed your trail. More gunfire, closer now. How long until they reach the valley? Grace asked. Minutes, not many. Ezra turned to Grace. Take the real map. Get to the far side of the valley. Hide in the trees. No matter what happens, don't come out until it's over. I'm not hiding while you fight. You're protecting the map. That's more important than fighting. The map is a piece of leather. You're a person. I'm not choosing leather over people. Grace. No. Her voice was flat, final. We stand together or we don't stand at all. Thomas watched this exchange with something that might have been approval. She has warrior spirit. My father would have liked her. Your father had more sense than to argue with stubborn women, Ezra muttered. This is true. A man burst from the tunnel entrance Ezra and Grace had used. One of Kane's men, rifle up, eyes wild. He saw the Shoshone warriors and fired without aiming. 3 rifles answered. The man went down, and then they were coming, pouring out of the tunnel entrance like water from a broken dam. 6 men, 7, 8. Ezra shot the first one through the chest, worked the lever, shot the second one in the leg. The man went down screaming. The Shoshone warriors spread out, taking positions behind rocks and trees, firing with the calm precision of men defending their home. Grace crouched behind a boulder derringer, reloaded, waiting for someone to get close enough for the short-range weapon to matter. The battle lasted maybe 5 minutes. It felt like hours. When the shooting stopped, 9 of Kane's men lay dead or wounded in the snow. 3 had retreated back into the tunnel. The valley was quiet again, except for the hiss of steam from the springs and the moans of the wounded. Thomas walked among the fallen, checking them. When he found one still alive and conscious, he knelt beside the man. Where is Kane? Thomas asked. The man spat blood. Go to hell. Thomas pressed his rifle barrel against the man's wounded leg. Where? The man screamed. He's coming. With everyone, 20 men. He's right behind us. Thomas stood, looked at Ezra. We cannot hold against 20, not in open ground. Then we don't fight in open ground, Ezra said. We collapse the tunnel, trap them inside. And if they find another way out, there are 4 tunnels. We collapse all 4. That will seal the ring and trap us as well. For how long? Until spring thaw, 3 months, maybe 4. Ezra looked around the valley, the springs, the grass, the game trails in the snow that spoke of deer and elk. Can we survive that long? He asked. Yes, the valley provides, but you would be trapped here, away from your world. Ezra thought about his cabin, about the isolation he'd chosen, about 3 years of being alone. Then he looked at Grace. She looked back. I've been alone long enough, Ezra said. Thomas nodded. Then we seal the valley. My men will handle 3 tunnels. You and your woman will handle the 4th, the one they are coming through now. She's not my woman, Thomas smiled. Not yet. He turned and began giving orders in Shoshone. His warriors scattered, moving quickly toward the other tunnel entrances. Ezra and Grace were left alone at the main entrance, staring into darkness, where Silas Kane and 20 armed men were coming. How do we collapse a tunnel? Grace asked. Carefully, with dynamite if we had any, with rocks and prayer if we don't. He studied the entrance. The tunnel was maybe 7 feet high, carved by water over centuries. The ceiling was solid granite in most places, but near the entrance, there were sections of cracked stone where ice had worked its way into fissures and expanded. Those cracks were weak points. We need to widen those cracks, Ezra said. Use wedges, drive them in deep, let the ice do the rest. We don't have time for ice to work. No, but we have Shadow. He looked at the dog. Shadow looked back, tongue lolling, ready for whatever came next. Good boy, Ezra said. Now go find me the biggest, meanest grizzly bear in this valley and bring him here. Shadow's ears perked up. He looked at Ezra like the man had lost his mind. I'm serious. There's a bear den around here somewhere. Has to be. Find it. Get the bear angry. Bring him here. You want to fight Kane with a bear? Grace asked. I want to use a bear to collapse the tunnel. Angry grizzly charges through, hits those weak spots in the ceiling, whole thing comes down. That's insane. You have a better idea. She didn't. Shadow, bless him, seemed to understand despite the lunacy of the order. He took off running, nose to the ground, heading for the tree line. Ezra turned to Grace. When I say run, you run. Don't wait. Don't look back. Get to the far side of the valley and stay there. What about you? I'll be right behind you. You're lying again. Yeah. From the tunnel came the sound of many boots on stone. Voices, the metallic click of rifles being checked. They were coming. Ezra positioned himself behind a boulder that gave him a clearer view of the tunnel entrance. Grace crouched beside him, derringer in hand. If this doesn't work, she said quietly, I want you to know something. What? You're a good man, Ezra Blackwood. Better than you think. Sarah and Daniel would be proud. Ezra's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. The first man emerged from the tunnel, then another, then 5 more, then Silas Kane himself, black coat swirling around him, rifle in hand, smile on his face like he'd already won. Blackwood, Kane called out, his voice echoing across the valley. I see you, and I see that pretty nun of yours. Come out now, and maybe I'll kill you quick. Ezra didn't answer, just watched as Kane's men spread out, taking up positions. No, Kane continued. Fine, we'll do this the hard way. Boys, when you see them shoot the man, I want the woman alive, at least until she tells me where the real map is. One of Kane's men stepped forward, raising his rifle. From the tree line came a sound that stopped everyone cold. A roar, deep, primal, furious. The grizzly bear that exploded from the pines was the biggest animal Ezra had ever seen. Had to go 800 pounds, maybe more. And it was mad. Shadow had done his job well. The bear charged straight at the tunnel entrance, straight at the cluster of men standing there. Kane's men scattered, shouting, firing wildly. Bullets hit the bear. 3, 4, 5. The animal roared, blood flying from wounds that would have killed a smaller creature, but grizzlies don't die easy. The bear hit the tunnel entrance at a full run. The impact shook the ground. Cracked stone turned into falling stone. The ceiling began to collapse. Kane saw it coming, started to run back into the tunnel, got 3 steps before the mountain came down on him. Rock and ice and granite crashed down in a roar that drowned out even the bear. The tunnel entrance disappeared under tons of stone. Men screamed cut off mid-sound as the avalanche buried them. When the dust settled, the tunnel was gone, sealed by rock and rubble and the bodies of men who'd chosen the wrong side of a fight. The grizzly, wounded and angry but alive, turned and lumbered back into the forest. Shadow wisely stayed very far away from it. Grace stood slowly staring at the collapsed tunnel. Is Cain dead? If he's not, he will be. Nobody survives under that much rock. Thomas Red Cloud appeared from the mist, his warriors behind him. The other tunnels are sealed. The valley is protected. He looked at the rubble, at the blood in the snow, at the bodies visible between the rocks. My father's vision was true, Thomas said. The woman in black and the ghost warrior standing between the sacred water and those who would poison it. The spirits are pleased. Ezra wasn't sure about spirits being pleased, but he was sure about one thing. Silas Cain's reign of terror was over. The map was safe. The valley was protected. And for the first time in 3 years, Ezra Blackwood felt like maybe he'd done something right. They found Cain 3 hours later, while searching through the rubble for any survivors. He was still alive. Barely. Trapped under a boulder that had crushed both his legs. His face was white with pain and blood loss. He wouldn't last the night. Thomas wanted to leave him to die slow. Ezra almost agreed, but Grace knelt beside the dying man, and her face held something Ezra didn't expect. Pity. Silas Cain, she said quietly. Can you hear me? Cain's eyes flickered open, focused on her with effort. The nun. Come to gloat. No, come to offer you something you never offered Father McAllister. What's that? Forgiveness. Cain laughed. Blood bubbled on his lips. Don't want your forgiveness. I know, I'm offering it anyway. She reached out, took his hand. Cain tried to pull away, couldn't. I forgive you, Grace said. For killing Father McAllister and Brother Paul, for hunting me, for all of it. Because carrying that hatred would poison me the same way greed poisoned you. And I won't let what you did define who I become. Cain stared at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, confusion, maybe at the very end, understanding. My brother, he whispered. David, at Sand Creek. They killed him, butchered him. I just wanted someone to pay. They already paid, Grace said gently. Everyone at Sand Creek paid. The Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the soldiers who followed orders. Your brother, you. We all pay in the end for the violence we choose. The only question is whether we choose it out of love or hate. Too late for me. Yes, but not too late to die knowing someone forgave you. Cain's hand tightened on hers briefly, then relaxed. He died there in the snow under the weight of stone and choices with a woman he'd tried to murder, holding his hand and offering him grace he didn't deserve. Grace stood, walked away. Ezra followed her to the edge of the springs where steam rose into the cold air. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, she said. Forgiving him. Meaning it. Anyone can say words, but to actually mean them. She trailed off. Ezra didn't push. Thomas approached carrying something wrapped in leather, the real map. He handed it to Grace. This belongs to my people, he said, but my father trusted the black robe with it, and the black robe trusted you. So now I trust you.
This valley's
Keep
alive
it,
with wonder.
protect it.
And danger.
Make sure
Mist
no
hides
more
much.
men like
Stay
Cain
close.
come
I
hunting
will.
for our water. Grace took the map, held it carefully. I will. You have my word. Your word is good. My father's spirit told me so. He turned to Ezra. And you, Ghostwalker, you are welcome among the Shoshone. You fought for us, bled for us. That makes you brother. He pressed something into Ezra's hand, a carved stone pendant on a leather thong. The symbol etched into it was simple but meaningful, a circle with 4 lines radiating out. The 4 directions, the 4 seasons, balance. Thank you, Ezra said. Thomas nodded. The valley is sealed for winter. When spring comes, we will open one tunnel. Until then, you are our guests. There is food, shelter, warmth. The valley provides. We'll pull our weight, Ezra said. I know. Your woman already offered to help my wife with the children. She has healer's hands. She's not Thomas smiled. Yes, not your woman. You keep saying this. Maybe if you say it enough times, it will become true. But I do not think so. He walked away, leaving Ezra and Grace alone beside the springs. They stood in silence for a while, watching the steam rise, watching the light fade as evening came to the valley. "We're trapped here for 3 months," Grace finally said. "Yeah, in a hidden valley with 12 Shoshone warriors and their families. Yeah, just you and me." And shadow, and shadow. More silence. The kind that wasn't uncomfortable, just present. "Ezra," Grace said, "I may need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm leaving the sisters. When we get out of here, I'm not going back to the convent." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because I'm done hiding, done pretending that saying prayers and avoiding life is the same as living it. I thought joining the order would fill the hole Thomas's death left. But it didn't. It just gave me a different kind of emptiness. Then I met you, and you showed me that broken people can still fight, can still care, can still choose to stand up even when staying down would be easier. I didn't show you anything. You already knew how to fight." "No, I knew how to survive. You taught me the difference." Ezra didn't know what to say to that. Wasn't sure there were words for what he was feeling. Grace took his hand. Her fingers were warm despite the cold air. "When we get out of here," she said, "I'm going to need a place to stay. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can figure out who I am now that I'm not a nun anymore." "I know a cabin," Ezra said. "Up on Wind River Range. It's small, not much to look at, but it's got a good roof and a warm fire." "Is there room for two?" "Could be, if the second person doesn't mind a man who talks to his dog and has nightmares." "I have nightmares too. Maybe we can keep each other awake." She looked up at him. In the fading light, her eyes were dark and deep and full of something that made Ezra's breath catch. "Grace," he said, "I'm not good at this. Haven't been with anyone since Sarah. Don't know if I remember how." "Then we'll figure it out together, like we figured out how to survive Cain, like we figured out how to collapse a tunnel with an angry bear." Despite everything, despite the death and the violence and the exhaustion, Ezra laughed, really laughed for the first time in 3 years. "We did do that, didn't we?" "We did." She leaned against him. He put his arm around her shoulders. They stood there as night fell over Sacred Valley, two broken people holding each other up, learning how to be whole again. The winter passed. Days fell into a rhythm. Ezra hunted with the Shoshone men, learning their techniques, teaching them his. Grace worked with the women, using her medical knowledge to treat illnesses, helping deliver a baby in February when one of the warriors' wives went into early labor. At night, Ezra and Grace shared a shelter Thomas's people had built for them. Small, simple, warm. They talked for hours in the darkness, sharing stories of the people they'd been before grief hollowed them out. Ezra told her about Sarah's laugh, about Daniel's love of wood carving, about the guilt that had driven him into isolation. Grace told him about Thomas, her cavalry husband, about the day his body came back from Little Bighorn, wrapped in canvas, about joining the sisters, because she couldn't face a future alone. They talked about the future they might build together, about a cabin on a mountain, about learning to live with ghosts without being haunted by them. And slowly, carefully, they learned to touch without flinching, to trust without fear, to love without waiting for loss. In March, Thomas's men began clearing one of the tunnels. By the first week of April, it was passable. The day they left Sacred Valley, the whole tribe gathered to see them off. Thomas presented them with supplies for the journey: dried meat, herbs, a new rifle for Ezra, a medicine bag for Grace. "You will come back?" Thomas asked. "Every summer," Ezra promised, "for as long as we're able." "Good. My children need to learn your tracking skills. And my wife has grown fond of the nun who is not a nun anymore." Grace smiled. "I've grown fond of her too." They left at dawn, following a trail that would take them southeast to Wind River Range. Shadow ranged ahead, tail wagging, happy to be moving again. Behind them, Sacred Valley disappeared into the mountains, hidden and protected just as it had been for centuries. The old man stopped talking. The cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Outside, full night had fallen. Daniel sat forward, eyes wide. "What happened next, Grandpa? Did you go back to the cabin? Did Grandma stay with you?" Ezra smiled. "She stayed. We were married that summer by a traveling preacher. Lived in the cabin for 5 years. Then we moved down to the valley, built a bigger house. Had 2 children. Your father was the oldest. And you went back to Sacred Valley every summer. Every summer for 40 years. Watch Thomas's children grow up. Watch the valley stay hidden and safe. The Shoshone protected still. What about Marshall Hayes and Red Dalton? Hayes stayed Marshall until he retired. Married Red in '69. They ran the trading post together for 30 years. Good people. Long gone now. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, and grandmother, she really stopped being a nun for you. She stopped being a nun for herself, Ezra corrected gently. I was just the reason she realized she needed to. He stood slowly, joints creaking, walked to the wall where the photograph hung. Grace at 60, gray in her hair, but fire still in her eyes. Ezra beside her, weathered but content. She died 10 years ago, Ezra said quietly. Pneumonia, quick, painless. She made me promise not to go back to being alone. Made me promise to keep living. So I did. For her. Daniel came to stand beside his grandfather, looked at the photograph, at the carved cross, at the map in its frame. I'm scared, Grandpa, he admitted. About the war, about dying. Ezra put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Fear's natural. Your grandmother was scared that day on the ridge. I was scared every minute we ran from Cain. But being scared doesn't mean being broken. It means being human. What if I die over there? Then you die fighting for something bigger than yourself. Like your grandmother fought for Sacred Valley. Like I fought for her. That's all we can do, Daniel. Find something worth protecting and protect it with everything we have. He reached up, took down the carved cross, pressed it into Daniel's hand. Your grandmother wore this for 40 years. Now it's yours. When you're scared, when you're alone, remember courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway. Daniel closed his hand around the cross. Tears ran down his face. Ezra pulled the boy into a hug, held him the way he'd held his own Daniel 50 years ago, the way every father holds a son before sending him into the unknown. Come back to me, Ezra whispered. Please come back. I'll try, Grandpa. That's all I ask. They stood there for a long time, old man and young man holding on to each other as the fire burned low and the night deepened. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, silent, covering the world in white. Daniel left at dawn. Ezra stood on the porch and watched his grandson ride away, the carved cross hanging around the boy's neck, disappearing into the gray morning light. When he could no longer see the horse, Ezra went back inside. The cabin felt empty, quiet. He sat in his rocking chair, looked at the photograph of Grace. Did I tell it right? He asked her image. Did I make him understand? Grace's photographed face smiled back, patient, loving, knowing. Ezra reached for his coffee. It had gone cold while he talked, but he drank it anyway. Shadow's great-great-grandson, also named Shadow, patted over and laid his head on Ezra's knee. The old man scratched the dog's ears. Just you and me again, boy, Ezra said. Like it was before, except not like it was before, because I'm not that man anymore. Grace made sure of that. The dog's tail thumped against the floor. Ezra stood, walked to the window. The sun was breaking through the clouds, now painting the snow gold. He thought about the cabin where he'd lived alone for 3 years, about the night he heard gunfire and made the choice to investigate instead of ignoring it, about Grace running down a ridge with a bullet in her shoulder, refusing to give up. He thought about Sacred Valley, hidden and safe, protected by Thomas Red Cloud's grandchildren now. He thought about all the choices he'd made, the good ones and the bad ones, the ones that saved lives and the ones that cost them. And he thought about the fact that in 2 days he'd turned 91, that his hands shook and his eyes were failing and his heart didn't beat as strong as it used to, that Grace was gone and Daniel might not come back, and soon enough Ezra would join all the people he'd loved in whatever came after life. But not yet. Not while there was still wood to chop and coffee to drink and a dog who needed feeding. Not while Daniel was out there somewhere, carrying Grace's cross and Ezra's stories into a world that needed men who knew how to fight for what mattered. Not while Sacred Valley needed someone to remember its secrets and protect them from men who would exploit them. Ezra Blackwood had been dead once. For 3 years he'd been a ghost walking the mountains and waiting for the end. Then a woman in a nun's habit taught him how to live again, and he'd be damned if he'd dishonor her memory by giving up now. He pulled on his coat, grabbed his rifle, whistled for Shadow. Come on, boy, he said. Let's check the trap lines. Winter's not over yet. The dog bounded to the door, tail wagging. Ezra followed him out into the snow and the morning light. An old man still walking, still fighting, still choosing to stand up even when staying down would be easier, because that's what Grace had taught him. And some lessons once learned you carry until the day you die. The door closed behind them. The cabin stood silent. And on the wall, Grace Hammond Blackwood smiled from her photograph, keeping watch over the life they'd built together, the love that had saved them both, and the legacy they'd leave behind. Outside, the mountains stretched away forever, white and wild and waiting. And somewhere in those mountains, hidden and protected, Sacred Valley endured, just as it always had, just as it always would.